percentage that was done for some of the systems, more than 1% at a time. My gut tells me that's not a smart thing to do. As we later corrected through some legislation about how much that we will require the employers to contribute, we had to soften that or smooth it somewhat. So, a reduction in an assumption, whether it's, for investments or anything else, if they do opine on that, that would be something I think we'd find very interesting.
That might be something that we could put in a scope of work. It might be something that they've already done. I do think that you would find interesting, perhaps, a comment as to the, I believe that the CERS phase-in was something that was discussed in the last audit. So just as an aside.
Yes, we have a follow-up question from Co-Chair Duplessis. Welcome. You're on mute, I think.
You're right. I was on mute. You'd think I'd have this figured out by now, Chairman. Thank you for letting me speak.
I'm only able to tell you
really
that, Co-Chair, because I often do that myself. So, from experience, I knew that what had happened.
But so thank you for the minute. I really don't have a question at this time. I just want to make a statement. You introduced yourself, Jennifer, as Brad Jr., and it kind of made me chuckle because I used to really worry whatever would happen if we lost Brad, if somebody else scooped Brad up. And it's nice to know we have a Brad Jr. But with that being said, I just want to say that I'm always amazed and impressed at the knowledge, the capability, and the abilities that you and your LRC team, Brad, you and the LRC folks bring to us legislators. We could not do what we do if we didn't have you. And I'm just really appreciative of your knowledge and capability. This presentation was a perfect example of the fact that you've done your homework and you know how to help us keep these systems afloat. So the 4.5 million Kentuckians that depend on you, thank you for what you do. You don't hear it enough, so thank you. That's all I wanted to say, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
Amen to that, Co-Chair Duplessis. When she said her nickname was going to be the Brad Jr., I thought maybe it should be the new Bo.
Nobody can fill Bo's shoes. That's not possible.
Okay, we'll take that under advisement. And again, I want to echo what Co-Chair Duplessis said. Thank you, and Brad, for your work with this committee. You just really help us understand a very complicated issue, and this has been a complicated issue. With no further questions, we will proceed with the RFI. And we will have a lot of opportunities going forward to ask questions, and that's a good thing about the RFI. We're not setting anything in stone today. We'll have a lot of opportunities as we go through this process. So, Jennifer, thank you very much, and a very, very thorough presentation, and we certainly appreciate it. Thank you. Next up is Dave Eager. Dave, she's getting out of her presentation there. You can come on up. And
Mr. Chairman, while he's coming up, do we need to make a motion to have the RFI?
No, I've asked staff, and they said no motion was necessary on that. We've already made the motion to do the appropriate the money and go through the process. So we're good.
Thank you.
Thank you. I asked that very question just a few minutes ago, so I'm glad you asked me so I could share that knowledge with you. Mr. Eager, if you don't mind, identify yourself for the record and please proceed.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm David Eager. I'm the Executive Director of the Kentucky Public Pension Authority. And I ask our LRC to invite Danny White and Janie Shaw from GRS, who are They can introduce themselves if you don't mind.
Yes, if you don't mind, please introduce yourself. Welcome to Kentucky and the our committee meeting today.
Yes, hello. This is Danny White with Gabriel Smith, actuary for KPPA.
And Janie Shaw, actuary for KPPA.
I know we haven't been asked this, but as long as you have two actuaries on the line, if Mr. Chairman, if you had questions relative to our past subject that you wanted to ask, I'm sure they'd be happy to take it.
Well, if you want to weigh in and give us the Cliff Notes version of your opinion of RFIs, please do so.
I would say that everything's looked well thought out, laid out. The part I don't know that would probably I'd suggest discuss internally is on timing for the LRCs and the PPOB's internal business needs. In terms of KPPA, they get their actuarial valuation reports. They adopt them in December, so that would be the earliest that anything could be provided to an auditing actuary in terms of the valuation, in terms of census data or anything to review other than assumptions, which they could see that from the experience study report. But I definitely feel like it was a well thought out approach with the RFI. And she's right. There's just going to be a limited number of firms that do this type of work for public retirement systems. So you're going to be a limited number of firms that will get back to you. And of course, GRS would have a conflict there, so we would not be bidding or responding to that RFI.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Eager.
Okay. I guess the question is, why am I here today? I have a feeling that there are meetings like this going on all over the country, and the primary reason initially was, which started in July or in August, was the investment return that retirement systems across the country earned. Collectively, we were up 25.2% for the year ended June 30th of 2021. We were actually at the lower and below the average, and that's due to the lower risk posture we have and the more conservative asset allocation. But anywhere from 22 to 30% is kind of the going rate. So I think that's one issue that got this ball rolling. Here in Kentucky, I think give credit to Jim Carroll. He's raised the issue. I think he's an excellent advocate. We find him to be an excellent advocate for retirees and a very professional approach. What's happened since July, and we got these numbers, we're now facing inflation. We have the Social Security has just announced their COLA for 2022 is 5.9%. That's a multiple of what it's been in recent years. And secondly, the average retirement system nationwide is public system is over 82% funded. So most funds are in a much better position than we are to be able to take on a COLA. We talk about earning the 25%. Actually, K non-has earned 22.6, and K and C non-has earned 25.6. The premium they earned over the assumption in both cases was 17.4 and 19.3. The shortfall we had in 2009 versus the assumptions, the current assumption, not the then assumptions, I don't have that number at hand, 22.5 and 23.8. So we lost more money relative to the assumptions in 2009 than we gained in 2021. That's the two tails, and we want to keep that in mind, that there's, I think, as GRS would say, if you give a COLA away, you can't get it back. And that's the judgment that has to take place. And as you know, we're not taking a policy stand one way or another. I'm here to present information, answer questions, as are the GRS people. But I want to hit the history of COLAs. We've got a schedule going way back. What's the impact on retirees and purchasing power? There are different types of COLAs. I'm going to run through them quickly. I think you ought to have a background on generate COLAs. It's not just a simple yes, no, and a single way to go about it. I talked about practices in other states. We just generalize on that, go into the statutes that apply, and then GRS has projected the cost of a variety of scenarios, including Jim Carroll's 1.5% COLA for 5 years. So types of COLAs, they're all over the map. The main starting point is, are they automatic or are they ad hoc? And by automatic, they're built in and they occur. There can be a formula established. It can be a certain percentage, but it happens year after year after year until it's taken away. Ad hoc says it's dealt with every year, or it's dealt with periodically. And we are, you'll see in Kentucky, we went years doing ad hoc. And then in 1996, we went to automatic. And I wasn't around in 1996. I suspect part of the driver was you didn't have to keep going back to the legislature each year and asking go through that process. It got set up in what was perceived to be a reasonable, prudent manner. But if you took 10 retirement systems that had COLAs and you looked at what they did, you'd have 10 different answers. They have they'll use they'll use a CPI. They'll use a percentage of the CPI. They'll use a fixed percent. They'll require certain funding. They'll require certain earnings. They may delay the start date till somebody retires. They may allow you to buy a COLA by getting an initial discount when you retire. Fixed rates. Or only a portion. The first $10,000 gets a COLA, but beyond that, so it's not a simple answer. There's a variety of things, but let's look at the history in Kentucky. Starting in the 60s, we had 4 COLAs. They ranged from 0.25 to 1.47%. They varied in different years. In the 70s, we had 3 that provided COLAs from 2 to 5%. In the 80s, now we're dealing with COLAs just about every year. We had 9, and they sometimes were based on years of service and so much a month, and sometimes they were a percentage, most often 4 or 4.5% COLA. That and it says it goes up to 15%. That was a very small group of people who had a long service, but nonetheless there was a 15% COLA. In the 90s, again, we're dealing with typically 2 to 3% COLAs, and in 1996 is when we went from ad hoc to regular routine, and it was driven by the CPIU, which is the CPI Urban Index, and it ranged from about 1.5% to 3.4%, and COLAs went away at the end of fiscal 2012, and we haven't had one since. By the way, inflation in the 60s, here's how inflation went. In the 60s, on the average, 2.3%. 70s was 7.1. 80s was 5.5. The 90s back to 3. The 2000s 2.5, and the 2010s 2.5. So we've had moderate inflation, a lot less pressure to do something for the retirees. But if you took, nonetheless, 2.5 seems like pretty moderate inflation. But if you took a retiree who went out at $25,000 and lost 2% a year in inflation purchasing power, at the end of 20 years they would have 0.67 purchasing power. Now, in other words, they'd lose just 2% inflation for 20 years. You're going to lose a third of your purchasing power. So this back to this compounding any number has a terrific impact. And is 20 years a long period of time for a retiree? Well, the average K retiree is 23 years. The average state police is 25. So people live that long once they're retired in the system. The problem was that we didn't prepay for the COLAs, and by statute, so that if in a given year we gave a 4.5% COLA that's going to be in place for as long as that person lives, there's a pretty significant cost associated with that. And from a fiscal standpoint, the best thing was to pay that up front and get it covered, and we didn't do that. And that added to the unfunded liability. PFM would say it added about $2.4 billion. That was their number. But it also contributed to the negative amortization, it was a bigger number. So it contributed negative, and by itself, it was about a $2.4 billion increase in the in the unfunded liability. Here's what the statutes say. This is Senate Bill 2 in 2013. A 1.5% COLA will be granted in the future only if the KRS board, or now KRS and CERS, determines that the assets of the respective systems are greater than 100% of the actuarial liabilities, and legislation authorizes the use of surplus funds for the COLA. So that's one mandate. Or the General Assembly can fully pre-fund a COLA or direct the payments of the funds in the year the COLA is provided. So my interpretation would be we're looking at the second bullet in terms of what you're considering. And the 1.5% 5-year COLA that Jim Carroll's put on the table, or any other option, might come into play as requiring being fully pre-funded. And new COLAs are now not a part of the inviolable contract, and they haven't been actually since 1996. So they can be taken away. They are not a part of the inviolable contract. Here's back to the why are we here today. One of the contributing reasons is the inflation rate in 2021, and where you talk to two economists, and one says it's here to stay, and one says it's transitional, and we just don't know. But there seem to be indications it's going to continue at a higher level for some period of time. Nationally, what are people doing? By the way, I didn't say earlier, but the automatic versus the ad hoc, it's about 2.5 to 1, automatic versus ad hoc. So it's much more prevalent to be automatic than it is ad hoc. I suspect, and GRS can weigh in on this, I suspect that ratio is going to change. I suspect that more states are going to want flexibility. They may want to do one-time things like this, like Jim Carroll is proposing. So I think we may see more ad hocs. But here's the general trend. Moving away from CPI-driven, moving toward caps. In other words, something, even if it is indexed off something, it's going to have a cap. No more than 3%, no more than 5%. Those seem to be common caps. And be a fixed rate. So fixed rate automatically caps it, but we're going to use 3% or 2% or 1.5% in this case. And now more are being tied to financial conditions, funded status, and investment performance. And at our last meeting, Representative Plessy, you raised a question about this whole issue of, a little bit the concept we're talking about is getting a dividend, and we talked about, well, you can pay a COLA out, but you can't recapture it once it's out the door. Well, there are ways that can be done. And Danny started talking about Wisconsin as an example, and setting up a reserve fund. Danny, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, Wisconsin provides a dividend. They're very clear that it's not a guarantee. You have your basic retirement benefit, and then they look at actual investment performance. They compare it to a benchmark. If the investment performance exceeds that amount, then that surplus of those extra assets are then used to provide an increased benefit or dividend to retirees. And then in years where the actual investment performance underperforms compared to the benchmark, they actually claw back or pull back that dividend, but never below your original retirement benefit. The key there is there's inherent, it's just with everything, any type of benefit, there's no such thing as a free lunch. So in that regard, there's an assumption, there's an inherent assumption or expectation that a dividend will be provided. So there is a cost to it. It's not a free benefit, even when you think of it in terms of excess returns, but there's an inherent built-in or cost associated with it. But what does make Wisconsin unique is they can and they do claw back. But if you look at them financially, they're 100% funded. They've always been that way, by design because of that. The other thing you think of it in terms of the contribution, the employer contributions are more steady because now you have this other financial lever that you've got pulled on and that is the retirees now become bear some of the investment risk. Yeah, they benefit when things do well, but they also there's a cost to them, an inherent risk to them during years of underperformance, like 2008, 2009.
Okay, so we asked GRS to provide a financial considerations here, most notably in the end, what's it going to cost? And we've got a number of different scenarios that I'm going to look at. But let's start with just the status of the plans. And this is June 30 of 2020, not 21. But it is the bottom line is if you want to call it the dividend or the surplus. That's the amount of dollars that each of the funds earn over and above their assumed rate of interest in 2021. So as you would guess, to take a look at K9 has $390 million, C9 has $1,331,000. And the reason is it's so much better funded, and so it has a much higher ratio of assets to liabilities. But in total, it's about $2.347 billion of we can call it a dividend, a premium. But I'm going to remind you that we would have had we had a 2009, we'd had a bigger deficit than that, and that's just a fact. By the way, the June 30 of 2021 valuations will be out very shortly. I know what the funded status is going to be. So, for example, K non-has is actually 14.2. It's going up to 16.8. Might have expected a bigger bump than that in two things. One is, again, that's a relatively small amount of assets. And we're using actuarial smoothing, 5-year smoothing. If it had been the market value, it would be 18.5. The bigger one is C non-has is going from 49 to I'm looking at my notes. 51.8. Had it been market value, it'd be 57.5.
Yep.
So it's going to graduate, get a bigger bang over the next 5 years than K is. But I'll remind you, this will be the fourth year in a row, we've had increasing amounts of funded status. It starts slow. It's the principal to the mortgage. It builds each year, and we're on the right track, and it's just going to take 26 more years to take care of that. 27 years. Here's the cost. Starting with, I keep calling it the Jim Carroll number. I mean, he's the one who brought it up. 1.5% dividend or increase for current retirees payable for 5 years. It's $171 million. The actuaries would suggest you should pay that $171 million today. I think that the legislation might allow it being paid each of 5 years if it was committed to in statute. That's a Brad Gross question, not a Dave Eager question. Another option that GRS suggested was it was simpler, and they have witnessed it having perhaps what they think is more impact, and that is do one time, give them a 13th check, for example, June 30th of 2022, give them an extra check. That costs about 8.2%, 3%. I mean, that's roughly 1/12 of what it would be. That's $188 million. Two advantages. One that GRS points out is they think, from their experience, it's had more impact, immediate impact, and bigger impact. And what we would point out is, I jokingly keep saying I wouldn't want to be in our call center 6 years from now when people find out their benefits went down. They're going to call, and they're going to think we made a mistake, and they're going to forget they got it, or it's going to be one of their beneficiaries who had no clue it existed in the first place. So the third is if you take the 1.5% increase and just let it run. Don't increase it anymore, but just let it run till all the people who are getting it have died off. $352 million. So it's more than is on the table, but it's the same concept, but it would not have that cliff at 5 years. The next one, now we're getting into why these things are so expensive, and they're probably going to be cost prohibitive. Not our decision, but it would appear to be. Take 5 1.5 annual increases from the current year and cap it after 5 years. So you keep bumping it, $1.5 billion. And then lastly is a permanent 1.5 every year, 6.0 billion. Questions? I have nothing more prepared.
Representative Tipton has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On this slide that you went over, the one-time 13th check, I'm assuming that's for 5 consecutive years?
One time.
It's what my
One time.
question. So it's a one-time check.
Yep.
Instead
Yes.
of it being divided by 5. Okay. That was just wanted clarification on that. Thank you.
You know, that leads to another one that's not even on here, that every 5 years you could do a supplemental check at roughly, let's just say 1/5 of that amount, but they get it once a year.
Auditor Harmon has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going back to the one that mentioned the funding trends, I was thinking somewhere around here, but maybe I missed it or overlooked it. I was thinking there's something about capping it at age. Had some of these dealt specifically with, like, if you had someone that retired very early and you were paying a COLA, the COLA would actually not be given to the younger ones, just ones that had been in the, not necessarily in the system, but based on an age criteria.
Yes, it would kick in at some predetermined age, like 65 or 62. Exactly.
Gotcha. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a clarification, Dave, back on page 4 when you were talking about the history on COLAs, you mentioned that, did I hear you right to say that none of these were prepaid, but were some of these paid for that are listed, or none of them were paid for?
Well, they end up impacting the contribution rate the very next year.
Right.
But it's effectively amortized over a long period of time, so the immediate impact is pretty small.
Yeah. So, but basically, if they're not prepaid, basically they're just rolled into the total funded.
Correct.
Unfunded, and that's what we did on all of these COLAs.
It's my understanding from the research I've done. Yes.
Okay. Has there ever been a valuation put on what the cost of these COLAs rolled into each other has cost the system?
The PFM made a calculation that it was 15% of the reason for the unfunded liability, which works out to about $2.4 billion.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to unpeel the rest of it, but the negative amortization, which is negative amortization, means that you don't even pay the interest. If you're thinking about a mortgage, I got a mortgage payment, I'm not even paying the interest, so the principal gets bigger and bigger. That's a big number, and this would have contributed to it, but I don't know to what extent.
Okay, thank you.
Co-Chair Duplessis.
Thank you, Chairman Higdon. Just wanted to make a comment about this. Mr. Eager, Dave, you've done a good job as always presenting this data and helping us to research what's happened in the past. But we're kind of stuck, as I see it, my opinion, in a rock and a hard place. If financially for the system, it's best not to give a COLA for the next 26 years, if I'm hearing you right. But then after 26 years, pre-funding a 1.5% or whatever percent COLA becomes quite a bit easier because we're not making this mountainous payment that we're making right now. And right now we're making a mountainous payment every year to try to get this paid off. And for 26 years, we're going to make this mountainous payment. So we're left with a quandary, as I see it. we don't give anybody a COLA for 26 years until we get fixed, or we give a COLA and we figure out how to pay for it. And I'm just sitting here thinking there's no way, and it's been 2012. So that's another 10 years ago. So that would be 36 years, literally the life of an entire retirement age person's, retirement. They never got a COLA that they were expecting, counting on and needing. I don't think that's a way that we should go forward. So what I would like to ask is, and maybe GRS can weigh in on this. One of the things that we've all kind of grappled with is the cliff that we're going to hit in 26 years. In 26 years, we're going to have a payment cliff that's going to fall off where what the state owes will be so minuscule, right? And then the question is what do we do with that? Well, I've heard you talk about blending. What can we do to get our employees a COLA, but also to maybe impact that fiscal cliff that's coming in 26 years so that we don't have such a big fiscal cliff, and because we've given a COLA up front. Do you see what I'm trying to say?
Yes.
So could you weigh in on that? Because I don't see how. I know I couldn't sit here and not figure out a way to give somebody a COLA in 36 years. That's just not even fathomable to me.
Well, I'm going to be talking about some things, and I'll let GRS weigh in too. And again, I can talk about some policy issues. Doesn't mean we're recommending it. It's just we did have the discussion at one time about a glide path. In other words, the cost for the systems may one year be 80%, and the next year it might be 6% when we hit that cliff. And is there a way to gradually get there and extend that period of time? We call it a glide path. I don't know if it's a proper term or not, but maybe beginning in year 11, you start reducing the cost, but you extend it beyond the 26 years. If you follow the concept, it would go down every year by some amount, and that would be money available currently. I don't know. There are people float pension obligation bonds to pay for COLAs. I suspect somebody has, and push the maturity of that bond out further, so to a point where they feel they can afford it. I don't know about that, and I'm not suggesting that one way or another to do it or not do it, but it seems like it is possibly a strategy. But GRS, you got comments?
Yeah, we looked at the glide path last year, and or 2 years ago. We could find that work that was done. You're exactly right. It was to avoid this cliff, and I think the conclusion that I remember, at least one of the conclusions I came to it is, it's something that's very doable, and I think it's in the works. But because of your current position or your current funding period, that you need to wait a while before you start that glide path. You need to get to, let's say another 10 or 15 years, and then you start ramping down the contributions, as the funded status improves. But you never fall in that negative amortization conundrum that you had before. And then to the other part about the COLAs, it is a tough spot. Not to make it sound any better, but it's just, I'm stating a fact here, is the retirees in KRS do have some inflation protection with Social Security, because the vast majority of them earn benefits in Social Security. And that's not the case with the teachers. It's my understanding most of the teachers on TRS are not covered by Social Security. So that is one difference. And so they don't have full inflation protection, but they have partial, which helps dampen some of the lost wage, the purchasing power of their benefit. But other than that, COLAs are very expensive, and the costs keep was going to keep going up as you get more and more retirees to provide the same level of benefit. I mean, you can see that it's an expensive benefit. A 1% COLA will add about 7 to 8% to the value of a benefit. You know, if you make it a permanent COLA, just 1%, you're adding the value of that person's retirement benefit goes up by anywhere from 7 to 9%.
I think there's another factor. I have no idea what the numbers are, but a number of our retirees work. I mean, they retire and they take another job and go somewhere. So they have a supplemental income, and that income presumably is going up by some amount, hopefully, but I don't know what those numbers are.
Mr. Chairman, I had two follow-ups, and Mr. Eager just spoke to one of them. Can I continue?
You may. Please proceed.
So, David, you just touched on what my thought was. Is it possible? It's one for a working age person not to get a COLA, but it's another thing for a person who is not of working age or working ability to get a COLA. And maybe this is a question to our LRC staff, either Jennifer or Brad, but wouldn't we be allowed to do a COLA just for those who are disabled and or above a working age? Is that something we would be allowed to do, or is it not it has to be done for one, it has to be done for all?
I'll let LRC respond, but that deals with Auditor Harmon's question of there are some that'll say the COLA kicks in at age 65 or age 62 or whatever you choose to do, but that would be and I would suspect that GRS could give a cost calculation on, you say, oh, let's make it 65. You take the retiree population and only consider those who are 65 and do the calculation.
To me, that makes it more stomachable for a lot of us, because what we don't want are people who are on a fixed income and have no ability to raise their income. They're the ones who are counting on those COLAs to keep up with inflation that so far we haven't done. So I'm most concerned about those retirees who are, let's just say, 75 years old and not able to go to work any longer. That's the ones that I'm really concerned about. So if we could put some focus on that, I don't know if that's something that Mr. White could put to us. So it would be a comparison from 171 million to X million if we put an age of, say, 67, which I believe is the Social Security age. Maybe we could do something like that.
Yeah.
Would that be something he could send to us, Gary?
Yeah, he's shaking his head yes. Representative Plessy, okay. I also commented on all these variations you see. You can see some that say, we'll do a COLA on the first 10,000. Mm-hmm. Assuming that, the people who are getting 30,000 don't need it as badly as those who are getting 12. So there's another way that we could slice that data and come up with it would allow you to do more COLA, get more bang for the people that are getting it for a similar cost.
I think as leaders of our pension system, we need to look out to be able to take care of those who can't take care of themselves. And this would be something I would ask you guys to help us research. My last question is, and this deals with the payroll assumptions. If we do let's just say a 1.5 across the board COLA, that is to the payroll assumption, is it not? And wouldn't that help to offset some of this cost? Or have you already taken that into account with your 171 million?
You were breaking up. I didn't fully hear the question. Maybe others did.
I apologize. Let me try that again. If we were to do a 1.5% COLA across the board, that would essentially be a big boost to the percent payroll assumptions that the system makes. So does the 171 million estimate include the savings that we would see by having an increased payroll amount?
There wouldn't be
The
a
long-term savings.
change in the covered payroll. Yeah, the payroll will be for your active members, not the retirees.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. That answers
Yeah.
that question. But I would appreciate some ideas on how to have a targeted benefit, COLA benefit for those who need it. And when I say need, I'm talking about those who are no longer of working ability and or age.
Yeah.
Thank
I've
you.
got one other suggestion is to maybe approach the issue from the other end. And it could be helpful if we identify what is the budget, what is the General Assembly willing to spend for COLA, and then you could find out how much COLA you can cut it out various different ways to find out how much COLA you can provide. And sometimes if you look at it in that regard, it'll cut down the number of scenarios that you're looking at, or you get more directed. Okay, this is what we want. Just a suggestion, but
Yeah.
certainly you don't have to take it.
Thank you. I'd be a little leery of throwing out a number because it's kind of like when you go car shopping and whatever number you throw out is what we're going to spend. So anyway, but thank you for your help, and I would appreciate any feedback you have. And I'll talk to other folks about if we have a number as a legislature, we'll come back.
Yeah, and if you have any general ideas about scenarios, but in the meantime, I think we're prepared to look at calculating costs of some various scenarios. You can interpolate between numbers, but I'll give you an idea of some alternatives. I think with the express goal of trying to get more money to people who are more deserving and more in need.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence.
Yep, thank you. Auditor Harmon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is just a point of clarification going back when you were talking about the glide path potentially. I know we had talked about maybe the glide path. I know we had also talked about at one time stackable liabilities, a continuous 30-year AM each year. If there's a gain, then you AM that out 30 years. If there's a loss, you AM that out 30 years. Is that the same or a separate concept?
No, this is saying let's assume we have a level payment. It's going to actually go down a bit, but let's just say we have a level payment of $1 million a year for the next 27 years, and at the 27th year it goes down to 100,000. That's the way it's going to be, or 50,000 actually. You say at year, pick a number. I think we used year 10 in our calculation. We might have used year 15, but in year 10 we're not going to pay $1 million. We're going to pay 980, and then 960. But we're not going to be done in 26 years. So whatever you take off the top here, you're going to add at the end. But it gets rid of that issue of contributions went from $2.5 billion to $200 million, and some people would love that. But it's kind of a bit of a financial conundrum, if you will, and so you could kill two birds with one stone, avoid that big cliff, and start reducing payments much earlier than 26 years.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Harmon, you're exactly right on how that's achieved or how it looks. Instead of taking that one large amortization base, what it does is you're breaking it up into 15 or 20 different tranches, or layered amortization, and each one is amortized over a shorter period or a longer period, over different periods. So as those individual layers get fully amortized, then that's how you achieve the objective of your contribution requirement going down.
Thank you. And it looks like if you, I guess, created more questions than we got answers today. So, if you will, maybe the next meeting we'll discuss some of those, one-time payments or some of those options that Co-Chair DePlessis talked about for those lower income, I guess, retirees and just some different options. Yeah. But, I guess, we have we feel an obligation to the retirees, and we also have an obligation to a retirement fund that's only 14% funded. So, you kind of get pulled in two directions. But I guess I put the actuary on the spot, Danny, and what you have a fund that do you use the funds to pay down the unfunded liability, or do you use the funds to pay a COLA? You have fiduciary duty also. So your opinion.
So in our opinion, what we've told KPPA is it's a policy matter regarding on the COLA, whether or not to give one or what that looks like. Our concern and our opinion will be on to make sure it's appropriately funded. And when I say appropriately funded, if you're going to do if you come to the conclusion you're going to do a one-time payment, you need to pay for it immediately. Don't give a benefit increase and then decide to pay for it over the next 20 years. There's a cash flow mismatch. That's the part that would be concerning to us. But to align the benefit provided, it needs to be funded for in advance. That's the risk. Anytime when you do ad hoc COLAs, is how do we appropriately pay for it, because they're not being pre-funded in. And so that's where we really like in the statute on that second bullet, if the General Assembly takes action now, that it's fully funded.
Yeah, I would say also, I'm a fiduciary for the plan. If we get the full arc, and the General Assembly decides they want to spend another $1 on COLAs, I think that's your policy. That's okay. What I don't want to do is have you fund the COLA taking $1 out of their arc. That's what I don't want to take.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's a very good discussion. Mr. Eager, you have a homework assignment. Mr. Totten, Mr. Carroll, we will continue this discussion. I think it's very productive. Still don't have any answers, but like I said, we continue to look into this situation. So we have to figure out. We have to remember we have a fund that's 14% funded, and that's and on the other hand, the concern for our retirees. So it's a delicate balance there. So thank you all. Seeing no further questions, and concludes today's business. Motion to adjourn.